I've shared the story about my IT coursework on this podcast in the past, so I'm hoping you'll forgive me for sharing it again. It's about 1998, and I'm sitting in IT class at school in front of our teacher, Mr. Bell. And Mr. Bell has utterly and thoroughly lost control of the class. There's people chatting, people throwing paper aeroplanes around. And Mr. Bell stands up and shouts for quiet. And he says to everyone, before you go, does anyone have any more of their IT coursework to hand in? And there's a general murmuring and a bit of a laugh. And then there's the sound of chairs scraping along the floor as people just stand up, pack bags, walk out. And I'm sitting there. My IT coursework that I've spent hours on the night before finishing off is in my bag. And I stand up. It stays in my bag. I follow the herd out of the door. As soon as I walk out the door, I go, damn. But I carry on walking. I don't look back. I don't hand my IT coursework in. A week or so later, we get all our scores back. And funnily enough, I've got a D. And unusually for school, I actually get feedback on my coursework. And the feedback is, this is very good. But where's the rest of it? And I'm like, the rest of it's in my bag. But I think there's a great gift in that story. Because it taught me that the unpublished work isn't going to do you any good. The number of clients that I've got that have compelling stories, great emails, great books, entire book chapters sitting on their hard drive, sitting on Google Drive, not out there, not out in the world, not communicating the ideas that they need to communicate with the energy that they want to communicate them with. I discovered recently that the word anecdotal, we often think about an anecdote as being a short snippet, something that is supporting it in evidence. But the word anecdotal literally means unpublished. So for most of us, most of our stories are anecdotal because we haven't published them. And that's fine. So this episode is going to be all about publishing. Last week's episode was all about conscious research, was about coming up with story ideas on an ongoing, consistent basis and doing it consciously, making time to review your photos, to journal, to review your journal entries so that you never suffer from writer's block. Writer's block can become a thing of the past. But the flip side of research is publishing. Because by publishing aspects of your story, it could be what I call your core stories, key events that have led you to where you are today, or just things that you've done this morning, things that you're up to this week. Publishing those stories on an ongoing basis is going to create the need for research. So research and publishing are two sides of the coin. If you think about a coin that flicks in the air, they're two different sides of the same coin. You've got research and publishing. And the more you publish, the more you've got to research. And the more you research, the more material you have to publish with. So one very much feeds the other. I've talked about consistency and publishing on the show before. And I've got a few revised thoughts. So as I record this, it's April 2026. So yes, we've covered this before, but there's a few revised thoughts. In the past, I've been very much of the mindset of just make a plan, be consistent, go and do it, go and show up. But what I've seen with my clients is that they don't. They second guess themselves. We all undervalue our own stories to some degree. And actually, my role really is always to G people up in terms of having confidence in their story, being in their corner, backing them up and reassuring them that the story is interesting, relevant to their audience, insightful, contains wisdom. So I've got a few more revised thoughts on publishing today. So as always, we're going to cover 3 ideas. The first idea is story space. The second idea is what I call term time publishing. And the third idea is still going to be the public schedule. So let's go and have a look at the first idea. So in terms of making it easy to publish your story, to carry on telling your story, to keep on telling your story on a consistent basis, the first tool in your toolbox is what I call the story space. And the story space is just making space in your existing communications plan to have a section where you tell a story. So this podcast is a good example. The structure of the podcast is always the same. I have an opening story at the start. So I told you my year 8 coursework story. Then I cover my 3 ideas. So we're in the first of those 3 ideas at the moment. And then at the end I have a what's going on in Rob's world, which is the second story section. So within each episode there's actually space for 2 story slots. There's 3 content slots and 2 dedicated story slots. And having those slots, so I know that I'm going to be publishing the podcast pretty much every week. It doesn't quite happen every week, which I'll get to in a minute. But pretty much every week, I'm going to be publishing a new episode, and there are 2 story spaces that need filling. And then knowing that those 2 story spaces exist causes my brain to go, right, what am I going to talk about in those 2 spaces? And as long as you think about it more than 7 seconds before you hit record, your subconscious brain will go to work on it, especially if you can sleep on it overnight. If you thought about it the day before, the right story will come to the surface overnight, because that's the way our brains work. It's like you set a task for your subconscious brain, and then the subconscious brain goes and figures it out while you're not consciously thinking about it. So I think every expertise-based business should have some. Jason Leister, who I follow, calls this having your platform. Every expertise-based business should have a platform of their own creation. Your platform could be a podcast. It could be a video that you put out 2 to 4 times a month, or even just once a month, even just a monthly video. It could be a monthly webinar. It could be just an email. It could be a regular email that you send out, or a print newsletter. It could be any of these things. But in whatever you're putting out, we tend to think of our publications as being about content. So I'm gonna write a weekly email about writing memoirs, or I'm gonna write a weekly email about storytelling. So we tend to plan our communications in terms of things we're going to talk to our audience about, in terms of helping them to think about the problem that you can solve for them. And that's fine, and that's all well and good. And yes, you should have the monthly webinar or the monthly LinkedIn Live or whatever it is, the weekly email, the daily email even. But hold some space in each of those publications, in each of those content pieces that goes out. Hold some space to have a story. And make sure that you do, and make sure in that story space that you don't gloss over it, that you do have a story. So the people consuming your content, when I'm teaching this to clients, I get people to think about story and content as separate beasts. So content being the mechanics of how you do what you do, and people quite close to buying are more interested in content than people who are further out of your world. People further out of your world want to know whether they can know, like, and trust you first of all. So they actually need to hear some of your story first before they'll become more interested in your content. But people who are consuming, people who are in your world, who are engaged with you, don't distinguish between content and story in the same way. So have the courage to make sure that in whatever you're putting out, you've got at least one space every time for some element of story. Because the story is actually going to make your content better. It's going to illustrate the message that you're trying to get across. It's going to help you show rather than tell. So that was the first idea, was just making sure that you've got at least one story space in whatever ongoing communications you're putting up. The second idea to talk to you about today is a new idea, and it's what I call term time publishing. For the longest time, doing what I say I'm going to do is one of my values, perhaps one of my highest values. If I say I'm going to do something, it creates a very significant dissonance in my head. If I say I'm going to put out a weekly email and I don't put out a weekly email, yeah, I feel quite bad about it. So for about 3.5 years, I actually published every weekday. I published an email every weekday for about 3.5 years. And at the time, to be fair, at the time that was before kids. Things have changed a bit since then. I've had kids. My working arrangement is not black and white. I have a grey working arrangement where in the school holidays, while the kids are at school, I'm very much here, I'm on it, I'm in the game. When the kids are off school, it's a much greyer arrangement where I'll do bits of work, but I like to have the kids. I like to spend time with the kids. So the consistency thing of carrying on, making there isn't a way at the moment that I could publish every weekday on an ongoing basis, because I would get to the school holidays, or just normal holidays. It might not be that you have small kids that are in school. It might just be that you like to go on holidays or you like to do other things. So I think it's fine to plan in your publishing schedule around what I call the term time schedule. And for me, that's kind of ruled a little bit by the literal school term timetable, but it could be your own term timetable. I also think it's natural for us to produce and talk about our work. I think there's a natural flow of seasons and seasonality. And you talk about things for a bit, and then things run its course, and then you maybe have a fallow period where you rest and you recuperate and you spend time reading, absorbing. You effectively have some time on the beach to kind of step back. And all of this is fine. So I think actually it's fine. And so again, looking at this podcast as one of my primary platforms, my primary things that I send out, there is a sort of seasonality aspect to it where I tell people that I publish every week. And by and large, that is 75% true. But then just recently we've had the school Easter holidays, and I've been away for a bit, which I'll get to a bit later in the show. But I haven't been able to record. I haven't had time. I've not been it. I've been doing other things. There's no need to beat yourself up over that. It's fine because it's outside of term time. So I think in whatever you define as your term time, you want to be consistent. You want to tell people what the public schedule is, when they're going to expect to hear from you. But then it's also fine to have your non-term time where you can say, we're going away for a bit. We'll be back in a month. And as long as you've been consistent in the term time and you've been sharing insightful things and telling your story, because the stories allow people to get to know you, feel they can trust you. As long as you've been doing that consistently in whatever your term time is, then I think it's fine to have fallow periods as well. So term time publishing was the second idea. And it's just being clear about what your term is. When you're on, when you're off, you get to decide. But having a term time publishing schedule is going to allow you a degree of human flexibility for the inevitable messes that show up in your life, because they will show up, and that's cool. So let's just plan them into the schedule ahead of time. The third idea to talk to you about as regards to publishing is still what I call the public schedule. And the public schedule only applies in your term time, not your off time. But there's a big difference between having a private schedule and a public schedule. If you just have a private publishing schedule where you haven't told your audience when to expect to hear from you, if you just have a private schedule, then you're only accountable to it yourself. Nobody else is going to knowingly or unknowingly hold you accountable to that schedule. Which means that if you're going to... So yes, you can have a private schedule if you want, but you've got to be a very diligent person, I think, to really stick to that. I think it's more helpful. And whatever your audience size is, your audience size could be 3 people. If you've got 3 people on your list, or even just 1 person, the minimum audience size is 1 person. And if you go and tell that person, and it could just be one client who pays you, $300,000 a year or something. that could be your one audience, your one audience size. So if you tell that person, look, this is what I'm doing, you can expect to hear from me in the term time, every week, or twice a week, or 3 times a week on these formats. There's a great degree of momentum that gets built up by publishing on a consistent basis, because you train your audience to hear from you at certain times. So if you're following along with these episodes live, each episode goes out on a Friday, usually, unless it's like a public holiday or a bank holiday or something. Most of the episodes go out on Friday, and you just train people when to expect to hear from you. You're only going to be able to do that if you've been publishing on a regular basis, and you're more likely to publish on a regular basis if you've told people if you have a public production publishing schedule rather than a private one. And again, it comes back to an element of courage, of planting a stake in the sand and saying, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, this is what matters to me. I'm going to be writing about it on a weekly basis. Part of that process is figuring out what you want to communicate to people about. Because the other aspect about publishing is that if you're just publishing as a means to an end, purely as a marketing thing, purely as a marketing, either as a lead generation tactic or a client nurturing tactic, if it's purely as that, I don't think you're gonna stick to the schedule. You'll stick to the schedule when you're talking or writing about the things that matter to you, and you're finding stories to illustrate the things that matter to you, because the things that matter to you are also going to be the things that matter to your audience. If you create this term time schedule, let's say, but you're talking about things that are not really what you're fully fired up about, not really what your sole purpose is here on this iteration of life, then it's going to run out of steam and you're going to stop publishing. So you have to also ask, when the wheels do fall off and you stop publishing, is it because you haven't scratched deeply enough down the purpose rabbit hole? Are you aligned with your true purpose? And I've been round this. This is an iterative cycle that I think we all go round. I think it's quite hard to figure out what work you're truly here to do and to talk about and to share with the world, what your unique human fingerprints is, if you like. I think we circle around that, and we circle around that by having seasons where we are consistent and productive and communicating, and we're almost like, it's a feedback loop where we're putting these things out into the world, figuring out who our audience is, who our tribe is, how can we reach them, and we're circling around the fact. But if you find that you've been publishing a weekly podcast for a while and it just doesn't, you kind of know whether it feels right or not. And to me, these episodes at the moment feel right. Like I'm fired up to record them. I enjoy recording them. I record them pretty much every Thursday morning after my barefoot run on the field. It doesn't feel like a high friction thing. It shouldn't feel like you're stabbing yourself in the hand to do this on an ongoing basis. So yeah. So the third idea was the public schedule, was having a public schedule instead of just a private schedule. But I'm going to also add that caveat where if you stop publishing, just have a bit of an assessment. Have you been truly aligned with your sole purpose? And you can just answer that from your gut. It's a gut feel, yes or no, because your body knows more. Your body knows much better than your brain. We're at the end of today's episode. Let's do a bit of a recap. Today's episode has been about publishing. Publishing is the flip side of research. It's one thing to have all of your stories researched and lined up and queued up. It's another thing to publish them out into the world, either as standalone stories or as elements of your marketing to attract the right people to your body of work. We've covered 3 ideas. We've covered the story space. So the first, and I think the most obvious ways of making sure that your story does go out, is published on an ongoing basis, is just to make space in your communications plan, where whatever your ongoing communications looks like. And yes, you should have some ongoing communications. We'll maybe talk in a future episode about how much you can automate, how much needs to be live. And the answer is it's a mix. It's a mix of automated things that go out, and there's a live ongoing element because your communications and who you are is not a static thing. So there has to be a live element. But the first thing that you can do is just hold space for a story in whatever you're producing on a regular basis. The second idea was term time publishing, was allowing seasonality and downtime into your publishing schedule, and just making sure that people know about that. Like, it's fine. It's fine if you miss a week or two of the podcast, as long as that's your holiday period, and then you come back to it refreshed, rejuvenated, maybe with some ideas that you wouldn't have had otherwise if you hadn't had that downtime. I think the downtime is as important as the uptime. The third idea we then looked at was having the confidence and the courage to create a public schedule, at least in your term time, so that people know when to expect to hear from you. What else is going on in my world? Well, as I've just said, this is the second story space in the episode. I've just been in Northern Ireland actually for a week. Perhaps not a week, perhaps 3 days, 4 days. I've been doing a big run. I did a 20-mile trail run across the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, which is one of these ideas that I get. I like to do trail runs. I get these ideas in my head. I mentioned it to my dad and said, well, why did we do it as a motorbike trip? And we got a ferry from Birkenhead over to Belfast. Did some motorbiking up around the coast of Northern Ireland in absolutely bonkers weather, like rain, hail, winds, sun, all in the space of the same ride. So almost biblical riding experience, I think, at times. We had a few nights in a place called Bushmills, which was pretty close to where the run was that I was doing. We did a tour so Bushmills is famous for its whiskey distillery. So we did a tour of the distillery, which was amazing in the scale and the sophistication and the vision and the ambition of it as well. You know, they were saying they want to have 1 million barrels of whiskey in storage in warehouses aging by the end of the decade. So that was a good lesson in thinking a bit bigger. I also raised some money from the run that I did. I figured that I may never run 20 miles again, so I've been raising money for a charity in El Salvador called the House of Life. All of these things raise the stakes because there's so much that can go wrong with these big runs. You could be ill, you could be injured, you can be having a bad day. So then raising money kind of just raises the stakes a bit further. But actually the run went really well. It actually stayed dry for the whole run. It was very, very windy. There was 40 to 50 mile an hour winds, but beautiful part of the world, really friendly people. And I got around the run in 4 hours and 3 minutes, which I'm very proud of. Some very tricky sections on the run because it's a trail. Because it's a trail run, it's very different to say doing a road run. There were large sections in the first 5 miles where the path was actually flooded because the tide had come in. You have to just wade through the water. You had to get across slippy rock pools and things like that. So if you're thinking about a run where you pound the pavements, this wasn't like that. So I'll put a few pictures, both on the video version of this and also on the podcast page. So that's what I've been up to. I've been going motorbiking, doing running, and all of this is, I think, has been a bit of my downtime. It's been outside of my term time publishing schedule, and that's fine. Over the next 2 episodes of Story Systems, we're going to look at how to keep people reading. So I'm going to revisit suspense, and I'm going to revisit conflict. So I'll speak to you next time about suspense. If you found this episode of Story Systems helpful, you'll want to make sure you're on my email list. I'll send you a copy of my Lead Incubator System Blueprint and also my top 5 core story prompts for entrepreneurs. Head to storyrob.com/podcast. You can also find my book by searching on Amazon for Simple Story Selling. See you next time.